They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody ever mentions how blood can also drain you dry, drop by drop, until you're nothing but an empty vessel wondering where all your life went. My name is Nadia, and I'm 32 years old. For the past decade, I've been what my therapist now calls a family enabler. Though back then, I simply thought I was being a good daughter and sister. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Milwaukee, I learned early that family meant everything. My mother, Rosa, immigrated from Mexico when she was 19, a whirlwind of hope and determination that was slowly worn down by the quiet desperation of poverty. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my father left when I was 7, his absence a hollow space in our small home that we all pretended didn't exist. She'd come home exhausted, her hands cracked and raw from cleaning chemicals, her shoulders slumped with the weight of the world, and still managed to make us dinner from the sparse ingredients she could afford. I remember the way she'd hum while she cooked, a soft, tuneless melody that was the only sound in the house for hours. I promised myself then, a solemn vow whispered into my pillow at night, that one day, I'd take care of her the way she took care of us. I would be her hero, her rescuer, the one who pulled her from the depths of her quiet struggle. That promise, born of love and a child's desire to protect, became my prison. I was always the responsible one. While my younger brother, Miguel, a dreamer with a restless spirit, dropped out of community college to pursue his music career that never took off, a career that seemed to exist more in his imagination than in reality, and my sister, Sophia, a vibrant but impulsive girl, got pregnant at 17 and moved back home with her twin boys. I studied. My books were my sanctuary, my grades, my escape route. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school, saving every spare dollar, earned a scholarship to the University of Wisconsin that felt like a golden ticket, and graduated with a degree in accounting that was more than just a piece of paper. It was my declaration of independence. By 25, I had a stable job at a financial firm in downtown Milwaukee, a decent apartment in Bayview with a tiny balcony that overlooked the neighborhood, and what I thought was the beginning of a successful life, a life built on my own terms. The requests started small, almost innocent. Mom needed help with the electricity bill one month when her hours got cut at the restaurant, a little cushion to get through a rough patch. Miguel's ancient car broke down, and he needed it to get to his gigs, which were mostly open mic nights at sparsely attended coffee shops. Sophia's boys, now rambunctious toddlers, needed school supplies for preschool. How could I say no? These were the people who shared my blood, my history, my childhood memories of making tamales at Christmas, the scent of masa and cinnamon filling our small kitchen, and watching fireworks over Lake Michigan on the 4th of July, our faces lit by the brilliant explosions. To say no would have been a betrayal of everything I held dear. Within a year, those occasional requests became expectations, then demands. The requests stopped being, "Could you help?" and became, "We need this." Mom stopped trying to pick up extra shifts because she knew I'd cover the difference. The quiet desperation in her eyes was replaced by a calm acceptance, a sort of passive relief. Miguel quit his part-time job at the warehouse because the music was taking off, and he needed to focus, a phrase that became a running joke between my coworkers, though I never let on that it was a constant source of anxiety for me. Sophia enrolled in online classes, a gesture that looked good on paper, but dropped out after 2 semesters, keeping the brand new laptop I'd bought her for school to browse social media instead. She'd post pictures of her new clothes or a fancy dinner out, and I'd feel a hollow pang in my chest, a mixture of resentment and a deeper, more complicated sorrow. Every first of the month, like clockwork, the texts would start. They were like the tolling of a bell, a constant reminder of my financial servitude. Mom needed $1,500 for rent, a figure she'd text with a series of sad-faced emojis. Miguel's phone was about to be shut off, which was, he claimed, a dire emergency because he needed to be reachable for potential record labels. Sophia's boys needed new shoes, new coats, money for a field trip to the zoo. I became an ATM with a pulse, dispensing cash whenever someone pushed the right combination of guilt buttons, the memories of our humble beginnings, the sacrifices my mother made, the unspoken family code of "we take care of our own." I remember the exact moment I realized how much I'd given away. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was sitting at my desk trying to figure out why my credit card was declined at the grocery store. I had been mortified, a slow flush of shame creeping up my neck as the cashier stared at me, waiting. As I scrolled through my bank statements, a sick feeling began to churn in my stomach. I added up all the transfers, all the bills I'd paid that weren't mine, the numbers blurring into a single, horrifying sum. The number made me physically sick. In the past 3 years alone, I'd given my family over $60,000. $60,000, while I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and lived in a studio apartment because I couldn't afford anything bigger. I was a senior accountant, good with numbers, and yet I had been utterly blind to the most important equation of all, my life for their convenience. But even that wasn't my breaking point. No, I continued for 3 more years, telling myself this was temporary, that eventually Miguel would make it, Sophia would get a job, Mom would be able to retire comfortably and finally find peace. I dated a wonderful man named James for 2 years, a kind and steady presence in my chaotic life, but the relationship crumbled when I kept canceling our plans because of family emergencies that always seemed to require a deposit into someone's bank account. He told me I was being used, that my love for my family was being exploited, but I accused him of not understanding what family meant. I told him he was an outsider, that our culture was different, that blood was thicker than water. Looking back, he understood perfectly. I was the one who didn't. I was a girl holding on to a promise I'd made in childhood, long after it had become a shackle. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday in August. I'd just received news that I was being promoted to senior accountant, a position I'd worked toward for 7 years, pulling late nights, taking on extra projects, proving my worth over and over again. It came with a substantial raise, a number that was more than I had ever dared to hope for, and for the first time, I allowed myself to dream. Maybe I could finally buy a condo, a place of my own, a home. Maybe I could start that retirement fund I'd been putting off, a nest egg for my own future. Maybe, just maybe, I could take that trip to Italy I'd been planning since college, a solo adventure to see the world beyond the limits of my family's needs. I made the mistake of sharing the news at our monthly family dinner at Mom's house. The little ranch-style home in West Allis hadn't changed much since childhood, still the same faded yellow siding, the same cracked driveway where I'd learned to ride a bike with my father pushing me, his laughter echoing in the evening air. As we sat around the dining table, the same one where I'd done my homework every night, the same one that had seen countless family dinners, I told them about the promotion, my voice trembling with a nervous excitement. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds before the planning started. Not congratulations, but calculations. Miguel immediately mentioned he'd seen the perfect recording equipment that would really launch his career. He'd researched every piece, had the entire setup mapped out. Just $10,000 for a professional studio in his bedroom. Sophia started talking about moving to a better school district for the boys, a move that would require a substantial financial commitment. If only she could afford the security deposit and first month's rent on a place in Wauwatosa. Mom, my sweet mother who I'd wanted to protect from hardship, looked at me with tears in her eyes and said this was a sign from God that she could finally quit her job and focus on her health, on her golden years. Not a single congratulations. Not one word about how hard I'd worked for this. Not a single question about what this meant for me, just immediate calculations of how my success could benefit them. I was a resource, a utility, a means to an end. I excused myself to the bathroom, my heart pounding in my ears. I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was exhausted. At 32, I had premature gray hairs I'd been dyeing since 28, a physical manifestation of the stress I had been carrying for years. The dark circles under my eyes had become permanent fixtures, a testament to sleepless nights spent worrying about someone else's bills. I looked older than my mother had at this age, and she'd raised 3 kids alone while working multiple jobs. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I had sacrificed my youth, my opportunities, and my health to protect her from the very thing I had become. When I came back to the table, they'd already divided up my raise. Miguel would get his equipment. Sophia would get her new place. Mom would quit her job. They'd even calculated that I'd still have a little left over for myself. How generous of them. "You'll be fine," Sophia said. "You're so good with money." A twisted compliment that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. That's when Sophia's phone rang. She answered it, laughing. And I heard her say to whoever was on the other end that she couldn't go to Vegas this weekend because she was totally broke. The same Sophia who'd texted me 3 days ago saying the boys desperately needed money for school supplies. The same Sophia whose Instagram I'd checked that morning, seeing pictures of her new designer purse and matching shoes. The audacity, the blatant disregard for my feelings, was a punch to the stomach. Something inside me snapped. Not broke, shattered into a million pieces that I knew would never fit back together the same way. The years of resentment, the quiet sacrifices, the pain of being unseen, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. I had to stop. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. They all looked at me, probably expecting me to clear the dishes like I always did, to resume my role as the dutiful daughter. Instead, I picked up my purse and said 5 words that changed everything. "I'm done being your bank." The silence was deafening. Mom's mouth fell open, a silent, "What?" frozen on her lips. Miguel laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, a prelude to a punchline. Sophia rolled her eyes and went back to her phone call, as if my words were nothing more than background noise. They didn't believe me. Why would they? I'd been their safety net for so long, their personal financial institution. They couldn't imagine me cutting the strings. I walked out of my childhood home that night knowing everything was about to change. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of tears and shaking hands, a whirlwind of fear and guilt. But underneath the terror, something else was there, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. Relief. It was a small, fragile bud of a feeling, but it was there, and it was mine. The next morning, I did something I should have done years ago. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one across town, and had my paycheck redirected there. I changed my online banking passwords. I called my credit card companies and reported my cards as lost, getting new ones sent to my office instead of my apartment. Then I sent a group text to my family, my fingers trembling as I typed the words. I love you all, but I can no longer provide financial support. This is not negotiable. My phone exploded within seconds. Calls, texts, voice messages, a digital avalanche of anger and manipulation. Miguel called me selfish. My music career is important. He wrote, "You're holding me back." Sophia said I was abandoning family, that I was a cruel and heartless person for leaving her and the boys to fend for themselves. Mom, the one that hurt the most, left a sobbing voicemail saying she didn't raise me to be heartless, that I was breaking her heart. I turned off my phone and went to work, in the silence a shield against the storm. The first week was hell. They showed up at my office, causing such a scene that security had to escort them out. Mom came to my apartment at 2 a.m, banging on the door and crying, her face a mask of disappointment. Miguel posted on Facebook about how his own sister had turned her back on family, conveniently leaving out the years of financial support he had taken. Sophia sent the twins to my door with a note, asking for help with their school supplies, a heartbreakingly cruel use of her own children as emotional weapons. I almost caved so many times. The guilt was suffocating, a heavy blanket of obligation that threatened to smother my fragile new resolve. Every childhood memory became ammunition against my boundaries. How could I abandon the mother who had sacrificed everything for us? How could I turn my back on my siblings when we'd grown up sharing everything? But then I'd remember that sharing everything had turned into me giving everything while they took and took and took. I found a therapist, Dr. Williams, a kind woman with an office overlooking the Milwaukee River. In our first session, I cried for the entire 50 minutes, the tears a release of years of pent-up sorrow and resentment. In our second, she introduced me to terms I'd never heard before: enmeshment, codependency, financial abuse. That last one hit hard. I'd never thought of it as abuse. They were family. But Dr. Williams explained that abuse doesn't always leave visible bruises. It can be a slow, insidious erosion of your sense of self and your resources. She asked me to write down everything I'd given up for my family over the years. Not just money, but opportunities, relationships, dreams. The list was 3 pages long. A damning testament to my self-sacrifice. The job in Chicago I'd turned down because Mom needed me nearby. The graduate school acceptance I'd declined because Miguel needed help with his rent. The relationship with James, who'd wanted to build a future with me but couldn't compete with my family's constant needs. It was a list of my life. Unlived. 2 months after I'd cut them off financially, Sophia reached out differently. No demands, no guilt trips, just a simple text asking if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop in the 3rd Ward, a neutral territory far from the emotional battlefield of my mother's house. She looked different, tired maybe, or maybe I was just seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a demanding sister but as a woman struggling to stand on her own feet. She told me she'd gotten a job at a call center. It wasn't much, but it was steady. A small victory she had earned herself. She admitted she'd been using me, though she hadn't thought of it that way at the time. It was just easy money, she said, easier than struggling. She apologized, and while I wasn't ready to forgive everything, I appreciated the acknowledgement, the first crack in the wall of denial they had all built. Miguel took longer. 6 months of silence before he showed up at my office. Not to cause a scene, but to return something. It was $20, crumpled bills he'd borrowed years ago for gas money. "It's a start," he said, his voice quiet, lacking the usual bravado. He'd gotten a job at a music store, teaching guitar to kids, and the recording equipment dreams were on hold, maybe forever, but he was paying his own bills for the first time in his adult life. He was a man with a job, not just a boy with a dream. Mom was the holdout. For nearly a year, we didn't speak beyond the necessary interactions at family gatherings. I stopped attending. Other relatives chose sides. Aunts and uncles called me ungrateful. Cousins whispered about how I'd abandoned my poor mother. The Mexican side of the family was particularly harsh, throwing around words like malagradecida, an ungrateful person, and reminding me of cultural obligations to care for one's parents. The weight of their judgment was heavy, but I knew, for the first time, that I was doing the right thing for me. But I was caring for someone who'd never been cared for properly. Myself. With the money I saved from not supporting everyone else, I did things I'd only dreamed about. I moved to a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in the historic 3rd Ward with exposed brick walls and a view of the city skyline, a sanctuary I had earned. I started that retirement fund, a tangible promise to my future self. I took a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time or money for. I went to Italy for 2 weeks, sending postcards to no one, taking pictures just for me. The old Nadia would have felt guilty, selfish. The new Nadia felt free. I also started dating again. His name was David, a software engineer I met at a book club. He had a stable job, paid his own bills, and had never once asked me for money. Revolutionary. When I told him about my family situation, expecting judgment, he simply said that setting boundaries wasn't cruel, it was necessary. He'd done something similar with his gambling-addicted brother years ago. He understood the pain and the necessity of my actions. He saw me, not as a bank, but as a person. The real test came when I received my year-end bonus. It was substantial, more money than I'd ever seen at once. The old me would have immediately divided it among family members, keeping maybe a small portion for myself. The new me put it all into savings for a house down payment. It was a defiant act of self-care. Mom finally reached out on my 33rd birthday. She didn't call or text but sent a letter, handwritten on the stationery I'd given her years ago. In it, she said she'd been wrong. She'd gotten so comfortable being taken care of that she'd forgotten she was supposed to be the parent. She was still working at the restaurant, had even been promoted to shift manager, a position of pride and authority. She was proud of that, she wrote, the first time in years she'd been proud of something she'd accomplished herself. She invited me to dinner, not at her house but at a restaurant, and she insisted she would pay. It was a small gesture, but from someone who'd grown used to me paying for everything, it meant the world. It was a sign of respect, of a new beginning. We met at a little Mexican place in Walker's Point. She looked good, healthier than I'd seen her in years, the tired slump gone from her shoulders. Working, she said, gave her purpose. She'd made friends at the restaurant. She was taking an English class at the community center, something she'd always wanted to do but never had the motivation for when she didn't need to work. We talked for 3 hours, not about money, not about obligations, but about real things. Her childhood in Guadalajara, my memories of Dad before he left, her dreams that had nothing to do with being taken care of, my plans that had everything to do with taking care of myself. She apologized, really apologized, not the manipulative tears designed to make me open my wallet, but genuine remorse for having put so much burden on my shoulders. She said she'd failed as a mother by allowing me to parent her and my siblings. She said she was proud of me for standing up for myself, even if it had taken her a year to see it. I cried in that restaurant, ugly crying into my enchiladas while the waiter awkwardly refilled our water glasses, but they were different tears than the ones I'd shed a year ago. These were tears of relief, of validation, of finally being seen as a person and not just a provider. The healing wasn't instant or complete. There were setbacks. Miguel asked for a loan 6 months later, and when I said no, he didn't speak to me for 2 months. Sophia still occasionally sent passive-aggressive texts about how hard it was being a single mom without help. Some extended family members still thought I was selfish, a traitor to my own people. But I had built something they couldn't touch anymore. Self-respect, financial stability, genuine relationships based on mutual care rather than one-sided giving. I had David, who proposed to me on the lakefront as the summer festival fireworks exploded overhead, the same fireworks I'd watched as a child dreaming of a better life. I said yes, not because I needed him to take care of me or because I wanted to take care of him, but because we wanted to take care of each other, as equals. The wedding was small, intimate, just close friends and the family members who had respected my boundaries. Mom walked me down the aisle, and in her toast, she said something that stayed with me. She said that sometimes the greatest gift a parent can receive is a child who teaches them how to stand on their own feet again. Miguel played guitar at the reception, songs he'd written himself during his year of working and growing. They weren't professionally recorded in expensive studios, but they were real, honest, born from struggle and self-reliance rather than entitlement. Sophia caught the bouquet, laughing genuinely for the first time in years. She'd been promoted at the call center, was saving for her own place, and had started dating a single dad from her son's school. She pulled me aside during the reception and said she was grateful I'd stopped enabling her, even though she'd hated me for it at the time. She said her boys were proud of her for working, and that meant more than any handout ever could. It's been 3 years since that night I walked out of my mother's house and declared I was done being their bank. My life looks nothing like I thought it would, but it's mine in a way it never was before. David and I bought a house in Shorewood, a beautiful craftsman with a garden, where I grow the tomatoes Mom taught me to cultivate when I was young, a small bridge between my past and my present. We're trying for a baby, and I know that when that child comes, they'll grow up understanding the difference between supporting family and being consumed by them. I still help my family, but differently now. I helped Mom write her resume when she wanted to apply for a better position. I watched Sophia's boys 1 weekend a month so she could work overtime or just have some time to herself. I went to Miguel's performances at local coffee shops, buying a ticket like everyone else, supporting his art without supporting his lifestyle. The financial boundaries remained firm. When Mom's car broke down last year, I helped her research reliable used cars and went with her to the dealership to make sure she got a fair deal, but she paid for it herself with the money she'd saved. When Miguel wanted to upgrade his equipment, he picked up extra shifts, teaching lessons, and saved for 6 months. When Sophia's boys needed things for school, she budgeted for them, sometimes buying secondhand but always buying with her own money. Last Thanksgiving, we all gathered at Mom's house again. The same yellow siding, the same cracked driveway, but everything else was different. Everyone brought dishes they'd paid for themselves. The conversation wasn't about who needed what, but about achievements, plans, dreams that didn't depend on someone else's wallet. Miguel had been promoted to assistant manager at the music store. Sophia had enrolled in community college again, paying for it herself this time, determined to finish. Mom had been featured in a local newspaper article about immigrant success stories in the restaurant industry. As I sat at that same dining table where 3 years earlier they'd divided up my raise before I'd even received it, I realized something profound. By refusing to be their financial crutch, I hadn't destroyed my family. I had saved it. I had forced them to discover their own strength, their own capability, their own worth beyond being dependents. Dr. Williams had warned me early in therapy that some relationships don't survive boundaries, that when you stop being useful in the way people expect, they might leave. She was right about some people. Several aunts and uncles still don't speak to me. Some cousins think I'm a cautionary tale of American individualism corrupting traditional values. But the relationships that survived, the ones with Mom, Miguel, and Sophia, became real in a way they never were when money was involved. There's a photo on my mantle from last Christmas. All of us together, genuine smiles instead of the forced ones from years past. Mom in the center, proud and independent. Miguel with his guitar, working toward his dreams responsibly. Sophia with her boys, teaching them the value of hard work by example. David and me, no longer the ATM and the outsider, but equal members of a family that had learned to stand together without anyone carrying the entire weight. Sometimes I think about that version of me who sat in that bathroom 3 years ago, staring at her exhausted reflection, gathering the courage to say no. I wish I could tell her that the guilt would fade, that the family she was so afraid of losing would transform into something healthier, that setting boundaries wouldn't mean losing love but finding out what real love looked like. I'd tell her that being a good daughter didn't mean sacrificing yourself until there was nothing left. That loving your family didn't mean enabling their worst impulses. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to be their crutch so they can learn to walk on their own. The promotion I'd received that started this whole journey had seemed like the catalyst for change, but it wasn't really about the money. It was about value, about finally deciding that I was worth more than what I could provide financially. It was about recognizing that I'd been so busy trying to save everyone else that I'd forgotten to save myself. These days, my bank account is healthy, but more importantly, so am I. The gray hairs are still there, but now they're from age and wisdom rather than stress. The dark circles are gone, replaced by laugh lines from genuine happiness. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see an ATM or a provider or a safety net. I see Nadia, whole and complete, generous with her love but protective of her resources, supportive of her family but not consumed by them. Last week, my cousin Linda called. She was in a situation similar to what mine had been, supporting her adult children and aging parents to the point of bankruptcy. She wanted to know how I'd done it, how I'd said no and survived the aftermath. I told her what Dr. Williams had told me, what I'd learned through pain and growth and tremendous courage. You can't save anyone who doesn't want to save themselves. You can't pour from an empty cup. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to enable the people you love, forcing them to discover their own strength. She said it sounded impossible. I told her I'd thought the same thing once, sitting at a dining table while my family divided up money I hadn't even received yet. But here I was, proof that you could draw boundaries and survive, that families could adapt and even thrive when everyone was required to contribute rather than just take. As I write this, David is in the kitchen making dinner, a tradition we started where we take turns cooking, sharing responsibilities equally. My phone sits silent on the counter, no longer buzzing with constant requests for money. Tomorrow, I'm meeting Mom for lunch at the restaurant where she works, where she'll proudly introduce me to her colleagues as her daughter the senior accountant, not her daughter the provider. Miguel has a gig this weekend at a local jazz club. The tickets are $20, and I'll happily pay for mine and David's, supporting his art the way any sister would, as a patron rather than a sponsor. Sophia texted earlier asking for advice about her accounting homework, seeking knowledge instead of money, building her own future instead of depending on mine. This is what family looks like when everyone stands on their own feet. Not perfect, not without struggles, but balanced, healthy, sustainable. We still share blood, history, and childhood memories of tamales and fireworks. But now we also share mutual respect, genuine pride in each other's accomplishments, and love that isn't measured in dollar signs. They say blood is thicker than water, and they're right. But blood shouldn't drain you dry. It should flow through you, giving life, not taking it away. It took me 32 years to learn that lesson, but now that I have, I'll never forget it. My name is Nadia, and I'm no longer anyone's ATM. I'm a daughter, a sister, a wife, and soon hopefully a mother. But most importantly, I'm my own person, and that's worth more than all the money I ever gave away.